So I first of all, I got to admit, I am a giant nerd. I am not a hipster cowboy like you heard from Ryan earlier. And clearly, I'm wearing the exact same suit and shirt like John was wearing earlier. But I'm not just a giant nerd in terms of how I dress. I'm also a giant data nerd, a giant data wonk. And I've spent my entire career really focused in this world of data. I spent the first 23 years of my career on the customer side, and I started by writing a neural network program in 1995, right about the same time that John stopped coding, is when I got into using what is now the foundations of AI. And what I learned in those early stages is that the data and the preparation of the data is really part of the biggest challenge that you have to deal with. And it's really a problem of physics. I generated some of my first data models to predict the movement of the Swiss franc future based on available data sets. And what I realized is that when I put those on the state-of-the-art systems at the time, pre-Pentium computers, these were x86 systems that had math coprocessors. When I ran them on the 33 megahertz chips, if you think about how far we've come since then, they ran decent, and it would take about 25 minutes for these models to actually process each day when I was going to make the trade moves. Then I got the 66 megahertz system. Man, it doubled the speed. It's like, okay, wow, this data processing element is really critical. And so from that point forward, I had this love affair with data, and so I spent the next 19 years founding a company whose whole premise was about processing data. And we dealt with large-scale data. We dealt with processing in the scale of 5 billion transactions a month. We were sending 1.5 billion emails a month. We were dealing with about 200 million page views a month on a publicly facing website to work with and collect consumer health information to be processed around user profiles. At one point, we had the largest data set of self-declared, deterministic health information on 100 different health categories. And this was 175 million US consumers we had in this data processing platform. And we had to use large-scale systems during this time frame. And so this was going back to 1999 when I started this. And so we were dealing with Web 1.0, Web 2.0, the advent of server virtualization, the advent of storage virtualization, the advent of all-flash technology. And I fell in love with that power to process data and information. So I spent the last 7 years at one of the leading data storage companies dealing in large-scale data sets. I work with some of the largest cloud providers, the largest data center providers, the largest service providers, and I just continued to fall in love with this data set and dealing with what data can do for humanity. 5 months ago, I joined SHI to form the newly formed Advanced Growth Technologies team because I am here to help what I believe is the largest single event in all of our lifetimes, which is what generative AI has brought to data. So we've all seen the hype, we've all seen the information that's out there, all the jobs that are going to be disrupted and enhanced, all of the revenue and GDP that's going to be created, and all of the disruption that's happening at just a record pace. The question is, how did we get here to this moment? Well, if we look at the start of this, the concept of data being the new oil, the value of it increasing exponentially. Clive Humley, a researcher in Britain, coined the phrase, data is the new oil. But his colleagues were quick to recognize that just like true physical oil, data needed to be processed, refined, pipelined, and ultimately titrated to extract the value out of it. 11 years later, The Economist came out and said that the most valuable asset in the world is data. And that's because the advent of the hyperscaler, the large-scale cloud provider, started to amass these pools of data and these pools of information, and it became quite apparent to the world that data was the new oil. Interestingly, the month after that is when the really seminal moment for generative AI happened. The Attention is All You Need paper was written by a bunch of Google researchers in combination with Stanford University, and they came up with the concept of the transformer effect. See, the challenge that existed at that time, the physics of processing data, needed a boost, and the transformer effect was that. It added a greater than 10x scale of processing. That meant a job that would take 100 hours to process could be done in 10 hours. That was 5 years ago. 2 years ago, as John mentioned, OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and in the last 2 years, the scale of generative AI has exploded upon the world. Now, the challenge, and I talked about the CPUs that I used before, is that these new scale GPUs are poised to create a massive energy challenge for the world. Goldman Sachs earlier this year came out and did a research paper that showed that today the US's energy consumption consumed by data centers is around 3%. By the end of the decade, we're expecting this to be 8% or greater. That's a 2x increase in the amount of power that's going to need to be created and sourced to run these data centers. And what's behind it? These H200 systems, these Blackwell systems that are actually creating a rack density challenge where your standard 8, 10, 12 kilowatt racks are going to start to look more like 60, 100, 120 kilowatts per rack. These are physics problems that we now all have to deal with. So the challenge we have is that data in its pools of where it gets created, just like physical oil, has gravity. All of your companies have data, and they're in all different silos. Your own data centers, your cloud data centers, and they all have to be brought to the GPUs. Now, you see the divide that exists. This physics that needs to be brought together is that GPUs and data need to be brought together to be fully efficient. And so SHI is here to ultimately help this data challenge so that you can extract that value out of your data. So today, this morning, we're going to walk through a bunch of different aspects around this. We're going to start about looking at the actual hybrid infrastructure that can be created, the physical data center. Then we have the renaissance of the data center. We're going to move into lessons that we've learned and ultimately talk about some of the power and thermal elements. That's just for this part of the session. So I'm really excited to introduce the next speaker, who is coming from IDC, Penny Madsen. Penny Madsen's the Senior Research Director for Cloud and Edge in Worldwide Infrastructure Research for IDC. So everyone please give it up for Penny as she comes onto the stage.
Thank you. Great. So you guys have had so much information already this morning. I'm hoping I can put some of what's taking place across the market in perspective today. I'm going to talk to you today about what is driving cloud transformation in an AI-driven world. And I say AI because a lot of the conversation is about Gen AI, but a lot of companies are going back and realizing they also have to embark on a broader AI project across their business. So I work for IDC, where we cover more than 100 markets, and my focus at IDC is on the cloud buyer. And I'd say the cloud trends I'm looking at touch pretty much every single one of those 100 markets. Cloud is pretty broad, and it's something most organizations are thinking about today. And AI is driving change across this space like we've never seen before. So I'm going to take you through the impact of AI on this market. I'm going to look at why the dedicated space, and at IDC, dedicated for us is what you might call private cloud. And I'm going to look at some of the transformation trends that we are seeing. But First of all, I want to take it back to the data center, because before I was at IDC, I used to work at CBRE and 451 Research, and my focus was actually data centers. I worked on a number of due diligence projects as organizations went to build data centers in new markets. I've been privy to many RFPs, and I've tracked the market in great detail, particularly the co-location market. And I've seen huge amounts of change, and I think it's interesting to look at what these guys are doing, because they have to be a step ahead. It takes time to build a data center, it takes time to find the land. They're thinking very carefully about where they put these investments. And some of the changes I've seen that are shaping where we are today, well, take a look at Equinix, for example. We've got a retail co-location provider who reshaped the market, offering retail co-location, but not just placing a server in a rack somewhere, but highly interconnected supply here. We're talking about being able to put a server in, connect to your peers, overcome some of the networking challenges you might have, and gain benefits beyond just taking something out of a server closet. This really revolutionized the way we were looking at things, and as this happened, we saw their data centers get bigger. This is LD14, the 14th data center in a hub called Slough in London that Equinix has built there. That's how much and how quickly this model of retail co-location took off. We also saw a lot of changes in the last 10 years across the wholesale co-location market. This is Digital Realty in Singapore. I mean, 50 megawatts is not overly big these days. We're seeing bigger than that, but we saw the wholesale market change as well to accommodate your shifting needs. We saw wholesalers start to build out more space for enterprises that were consolidating, but then also for managed service providers, systems integrators, telcos, that were getting out of the business of building their own data centers or needing to enter new markets quickly. We saw them start to sell retail space as you consumed more cloud and looked for hybrid solutions so you could connect your traditional environments to environments that could offer you access into public cloud. And we saw wholesalers connecting into retailers, once again, enabling those hybrid scenarios. Then just after COVID, we started to see 100 megawatt data centers, and a new range of provider hit the market, real estate providers doing build to suit for hyperscalers that might want to go under the radar in some markets because they're consuming power, often in markets that didn't have a lot of power. So we started to get a lot of new energy generation techniques here. And we also started to see these these very large facilities meet the increasing demand across markets for IaaS and cloud services. So we've seen a lot of changes, but this probably happened over the last 10 years. And then literally overnight, we started to see announcements just recently, 5 gigawatts. This is Microsoft and OpenAI announcing a data center for North Dakota, a supercomputing facility. We've gone from 100 megawatts to 5 gigawatts, which is pretty big. Now, they're saying this is for supercomputing. You can bet that this is going to be Gen AI. And this is just one. There's been a few announcements that have been similar to this. This is probably one of the bigger ones. And this is why. They're not making these kinds of investments lightly. So I run a survey called Cloud Pulse where we go out to up to 1,700 cloud buyers every quarter. And we ask them about what they're doing with their investments, what's driving them in the cloud space, where their business is being impacted, which is leading them to make decisions. We ask where their investment's going to be over the next 5 years. Last year, AI didn't factor on any of these responses. This year, Gen AI, deep learning has come up pretty high. Last year, cloud-based infrastructure and applications was actually higher. And look at this. We also ask every single quarter, what are your business goals? Not technology goals, what are your business goals? Up until this year, every year we've had business responses apart from security. We've had, I want to drive my business revenue. I want to scale the business. I want to improve customer success. This year, even when we've broken it out by region, the business goals are focused on technology goals. So business goals are now tech goals. And this is happening because of Gen AI. So it doesn't matter where you are in this cycle, it is happening. And yes, there will be troughs of disillusionment. There will be changes, but it is on the agenda. We actually find that about 75% of cloud buyers are already carrying out Gen AI initiatives, and they will be at different levels, and there will be trials and tribulations, but it's happening. And if it's not already, this was done at the beginning of the year. 19% are saying by the end of the year they will have something on the table. And these investments are not happening in silos either. So some are using public cloud. As we heard, it's a pretty easy route to get started with. But we're seeing investments across the network, which signifies that this isn't happening in one particular location. We're seeing investments in hardware. So some of this is happening on premises and in systems integrators and services. So we are getting help with this. It's not happening alone. But this is really interesting. A lot of vendors ask me about this all the time. They get a bit perplexed by this chart. We ask organizations where their applications live. And we do this every quarter. And every year when we look at this, the percentages don't look too different. So you can see the non-cloud environment. That's your traditional environment. Your private or dedicated clouds. So together they make up those dedicated environments. And then you've got your shared ones, the SaaS, the PaaS, the IaaS. What we tend to see is probably the biggest percentage shift out of the traditional environments into the cloud, but only a few percentages really difference every year. And that's going into, well, it shifts. It sometimes goes higher in the IaaS, sometimes in the SaaS, depending on where you are. So if you think about COVID, for example, drove IaaS and SaaS. And more recently, because we've had more solutions come to market, sovereignty concerns, et cetera, a focus on some of the private cloud solutions as well. But what we do know is that 87% of companies have a plan to have a hybrid cloud architecture. Now, they may not all be there yet, and I think there's a lot of question about what being truly hybrid means for a lot of companies and how to enable that. But we also ask, when we get underneath a lot of that data, we also ask about individual applications. So what do you have that's in one location? Where is it going to be in the next year? Where will that be in the year after? And we've got historical data around that as well. And things start to look a lot more dynamic. So we have, you can see at the top here, we have the non-cloud and the environments going into cloud. But we also have applications coming from public into private cloud, public into non-cloud, and private into non-cloud. Things are a lot more dynamic. Applications are moving about, and for various reasons. Just think about Gen AI. You might be doing something needing to burst to get more capability. You might be doing proof of concepts in one location, then bringing it back in-house. Companies are thinking in a much more hybrid way about what they're doing. One thing that is a lot more siloed, I know Jack spoke about this, is data. So we're finding that 30% of data today is centralized in a data center. There's a lot of data still in the remote office and branch as well. And with the requirement for more high-performance computing, we're probably going to see more of that over time, and at the edge as well. 25% of those edge locations are in a public cloud, by the way. But there's still a lot that is centralized, and a lot of this is going to be really difficult for organizations to move. Sovereignty is one real concern for organizations, and that's really guiding a lot of the requirements companies are having around this data to keep it on-premise. And this is driving some of those use cases for RAG, for example. I think the other tricky thing for a lot of organizations today is that they don't know what is around the corner. Gen AI is just driving more of those sovereignty conversations. And we don't know when organizations are going to have to react to new regulations that are coming about, or new requirements by their own customers about what they're doing with their data and how they're using it. Sustainability, and this is something you're hearing about quite a bit today, is another concern as well. So for some companies, it might mean, actually, we're going to have a look and go through this data governance project. And for most organizations doing Gen AI, that's what needs to begin, is a data governance project. We're going to start to look at what can go into new locations so that we can start to get benefits from a sustainability point of view. Sustainability is now a conversation that is happening. I would say up until this year, it wasn't happening at the rate that it is today. We used to ask organizations about what their sustainability requirements were, and it used to be that it was a tick box. We would ask our supplier, are you sustainable? Are you using a green data center? That's enough. But now we're finding cloud buyers want to sit at the table and say, what is your innovation roadmap? What reporting tools are you going to be able to offer me? How can you prove this? Because our business wants to know what's going on with sustainability. And one of the big changes we've seen with this is that sustainability is now equaling for those organizations cost efficiencies as well. This is really changing the conversation for a lot of organizations. And Gen AI, if you think back to that 5 gigawatts, is just going to highlight a lot more of those requirements for businesses. I mentioned cost efficiencies. Well, I think cost is one of the things that's always one of those conversations that is going to happen, particularly from the board. But another one is how you look at the returns on investment benefits as well. So we're seeing more and more companies are being tasked with actually measuring these returns on investment back to key business KPIs, not just tech KPIs. And I think knowing where you can get some of those returns is really important. But we're finding organizations are looking at their clouds in different ways. And overall, they're saying we can get better returns on investment from dedicated cloud environments when it comes to ease of management, if we can overcome some of the challenges we have with skills and management, for example. Disaster recovery and application resiliency. And we're hearing more and more about requirements across those areas. Resiliency is really important, not just for organizations needing to keep businesses up online, but also for their customers when they're bringing customers into the fold. And performance. But the one interesting thing here, we track companies when they're starting to do hybrid cloud more, because hybrid is a strategy for a lot of these organizations looking at Gen AI today. And we're finding that those organizations doing hybrid cloud are increasingly saying we're getting the same benefits, we're able to measure the same benefits from both a public and a dedicated cloud environment. And that's where a lot of organizations are trying to get to, when they can actually start to be more dynamic, thinking about how they're doing their applications and make decisions that will suit different workloads at different stages of that workload's journey based on whatever they might be requiring at that time. Because we're finding that companies are saying that actually we've been doing cloud for some time, and what we've been doing is no longer fit for purpose. We've been adding bits to that cloud to make it more hybrid in nature, but we haven't really been building a truly hybrid cloud. So we've been asking the question, are you transforming or modernizing an existing cloud environment? And we find almost 3/4 of companies are. And they're looking to do this in about 2 years. There's pretty aggressive timeframes for this because they're realizing they need to actually get these things in place to enable Gen AI to actually work properly. Now, normally when we find such high rates of transformation, it's about either innovating or overcoming a major bottleneck that companies might have. And we've got this perfect storm of actually they're doing both. They're needing to innovate because we've got Gen AI on the horizon and other advances as well. We've got automation. We've got different observability tools we can now incorporate. But also we've got massive bottlenecks. We've got problems with skills. We've got problems with managing increasingly complex environments. We've got multi-cloud going on. So companies are trying to increase the efficiency of their clouds. They're trying to build more sustainable architectures. And sustainable is not just about environmental sustainability here. This is about companies building something that's more durable. Because the one thing they know is that the landscape they're now operating in is pretty uncertain. And they need to build something that can last the next iteration of change. They need to add increased controls for security and increase the performance of their cloud. This is changing the whole services mix as well, because a lot of companies are not doing this alone. Some companies might start building, for example, their own dedicated cloud, and then they're bringing in a third party to manage it. Some might actually start with a third party and then take it back in-house and do it themselves. There's many different models to this, but the importance of the services market is just growing because these complex environments require additional help in many cases. So before, a lot of the cloud and hosted services that were typically consumed were all around the managed security space, but we're seeing that change. You can see here, just linked to that cloud transformation, what's being consumed most over the course of the next year are all those cloud migration and transformation enablement services, and then AI. Because, as I said, most companies won't be doing this alone. And that brings me to ecosystems, because we also find that many vendors are not doing this alone. I think one of the biggest things we've started to see, at least in the vendor space, has been a lot of organizations saying to actually deliver truly Gen AI and other AI capabilities, we need to draw upon an entire ecosystem. And this has been happening for some time with other technologies as well. We're finding more and more cloud buyers are now having that conversation when they look for a new provider or continue contracts with an existing provider, saying, actually, what is your approach to partnerships? Do you offer open APIs? Are you working with best-of-breed providers? And if you're not today, you're actually starting to build pathways so you can actually enable that in future, because we know that there might be services down the track that we want to consume and need to consume for our business, and we want to know that we can get access to those. Because the one thing we know, as I said before, is that the future is not that certain. I know this came up earlier in conversation, one of the questions around quantum computing. Well, I think we take that 5 gigawatts and look at what that means, all the capabilities that come with that, but also the power draw. And we already know that, I guess one of the future advancements could be going from GPUs to QPUs, quantum processing units, and what that could mean for the market going forward. So with that, I will leave you. I'll be around for questions later if there are any. Thank you.